Well, good morning, folks. I'll put that down here for just now. It is a beautiful Tuesday morning here in Arizona. It is October 21st. We are continuing on our purchase contract and addendums, talking to your buyers. So I'm going to go over a couple of forms today. Let's see if I can move this. We are going to go over the buyer-broker exclusive employment agreement, the buyer-tenant employment agreement. Everybody, please note that that addendum exists. I don't know how many phone calls I get saying, well, how do I change this? And they can't seem to find it. I do think they flipped it because I thought it was tenant buyer and it's now buyer tenant. So it was hard to find before. But seller compensation addendum and real estate agency and disclosure. So we're going to get started here pretty quickly. Again, this is so you can help learn to present these documents confidently. If you have not read through these documents, go sit down in a quiet area and read them, right? You need to identify key sections that the client must understand. If you are working with buyers and have not gone over these 4 forms, I don't know what you've been doing, because this is your bread and butter. This is how you get paid. So you need to be doing this. Recognize where legal interpretation may be required, where you might have to say, hey, you might want to seek legal counsel if something happens in this area of the contract or this area of this document. How do you address it? So let's start with a buyer-broker exclusive employment agreement. And I will tell you folks that this is going to be very dry. All I have today are the contract documents itself, except for this one. You guys should see this. This is from AAR. It is, what is a buyer representation agreement? It says, why am I being asked to sign one? This is something you should read, right? So this is giving you words that you can use to talk to your buyer. You are ethically obligated to work in the buyer's best interest, abiding by the Realtor Code of Ethics. And equally important is that you know that the buyer understands what the realtor is going to do for the buyer, right? And unfortunately, I can't see that other part of that. Let me see if I can move this out of the way. Not sure why that's doing that. What the realtor is going to do for you and the cost associated with that service. And so it talks about the shift on August 17th nationwide that requires buyers to enter into a written representation agreement prior to touring a home. Now, let me ask the people here real quick. Those online can answer yourselves, but do you need a buyer broker agreement if you are hosting an open house for a Realty One Group agent? The answer is no, but I should have had everybody say that without even a doubt. You represent the seller, which is why you can only host open houses for Realty One Group. Because if somebody from HomeSmart is hosting an open house by a different broker, they can't possibly represent the seller. So if you are there on behalf of the seller, you are under that Realty One Group umbrella, and no, you don't need to sign anything that you have, rights to do that. That's automatic. You are a part of Realty One Group. But therefore, you do not need a buyer broker agreement. And if you are hearing that people are going to open houses, we need to start reporting these agents that are requiring this, because that is absurd. It was very clear from NAR that it was not required, and they cannot require that for people to enter a home. And buyers should just walk away. But that's their problem. But here you will see the first time, and this is repeated over and over at the very bottom. Remember, broker compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable between you and your realtor. You can hand this flyer to your client. I would have it as a part of what you give them so that they can go back and see this, but you should be familiar with this, that you understand, what you are able to communicate to them so they can understand what you are going to do for them, right? So this form is available from AAR. It was developed in August of 2024, hasn't gone away. So go look for it. Oops, my screen. Not working. There we go. There we go. Okay. So buyer broker exclusive employment agreement. And yes, we have a buyer broker agreement to show property. I'm not going to go over that today. I'm going to focus on this one. If you choose to use the buyer agreement to show property and have a question about it, feel free to ask me. I don't know why you are using that form unless you're at an open house and somebody says, I want to go to the home down the street, and you do not have time to sit down. Remember, this conversation that I'm talking about here is happening before you are walking into a home. You have to have this agreement signed. So there's got to be some meeting with that buyer before you go look at homes. Now, could it be online? Sure. Do all of you have access to Zoom? Zoom is a 45-minute. If you don't have a professional account, go sign up for Zoom and get a professional account if you're going to extend that out. Please understand that you need to be doing this in advance. And it says there, right in bold print, notice to buyers, all realtors are required to have a signed written agreement prior to showing a home to a buyer. Now, does not say it's the buyer broker exclusive employment agreement. You can use the other one. But what is the one catch on the other one? Why do I not feel it's very useful? Does anybody here know in the room? Mm-hmm.
Only for a certain time period, like, no, it's to show property.
It is to show property. What does it obligate the buyer to you for?
Wait, repeat your question on the buyer broker agreement?
The agreement to show property, not this one. There's another one that's agreement to show property. It does not commit them to you for anything. Only if you write that contract, you get paid. So if you are foolish enough to do a buyer broker agreement to show property and don't even get the client's contact information, you can damn well bet they're never going to contact you again. Okay? So why are you using it? If you would like to get paid, if you would like to create a relationship with the buyer, this is the one you need to do, because this commits the buyer. And yes, there is a time frame for it, right? All of the contracts in Arizona are going to have a start date and an end date. That's a part of contract law in the state of Arizona, okay? First, it's going to talk about the buyer, the broker, and the agent that's working for the broker, right? And you will see that the agent over on the side is called broker. That means later on in this, you are the one, when it references broker in the contract, you are the one it's referencing, not me, but you, okay? Please understand that. So here's the agreement. This is a buyer broker agreement. It's between the buyer and broker. You're talking to your buyer and you're explaining, we're going to come together. I'm going to agree to work with you, and you're going to agree to work with me for a specific time period. I am going to work to try and find you a home. Now, some people say, well, how long is that going to be? I don't know how long that's going to be. That's up to you. How long do you think the client is going to need to buy a home? Are they still out of state waiting to sell a home? What is going on, right? You have to look at the particular scenario, or you could perhaps just have 6 months is what you do for your buyer broker agreement. That's up to you. This is your business. We don't dictate any of that. That is your choice. But please note that there is a line that is underlined here. It says buyer acknowledges that signing more than one buyer broker exclusive employment agreement or similar agreement could make buyer liable to compensate multiple brokers. Do you think maybe you should read that sentence to your client? Yes, right? Anything that is bolded and underlined, you probably should read out word for word. Again, this is the conversation with your buyer that you need to have before they sign this agreement. So here we go. Like I said, every contract in the state of Arizona has to have a start date and an expiration date. Do you think maybe you should put the date this expires someplace in your notes? I just had an agent call me and say that a buyer wanted to work with them, and they said that their buyer broker agreement expired in August, and were they okay to work with them? I said, if truly that agreement expired, absolutely. But I said, you better double check if between August and October, that agent didn't slip in an offer package, an extension of that agreement. And they didn't realize it. So I've started to tell agents at open houses, instead of asking if somebody has signed an agreement, or asking if they're working with an agent, ask if they've signed an agreement. And if the answer is still no, ask, have they made any offers recently? Because we know if they wrote an offer, that buyer broker agreement was probably in that offer. Does that make sense? And it cost one of our agents probably $10,000 because she did not check that. They were under another obligation. Okay, employment. This is the agreement with your client. What are they going to do? This is your opportunity to find out more about what they're looking for. Are they strictly looking for a residential property? Are they possibly looking for land to build on? Maybe they're looking for commercial. So this is not for tenants, so don't put rentals on here, but other could be manufactured homes. So rather than residential, which would include a manufactured home on land connected, we now have the ability to sell mobile homes. So you could put a mobile home on there. I like putting a geographical area that is larger. I do not recommend anybody put a single city down because you and I both know you can cross over to another city in a block.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're like, I like this home. Oh, but my agreement isn't with you for that home. And then guess what? You're not the agent of record. They could go to somebody else and say, I'll work with you for Scottsdale. I'm going to work with you for Peoria. I'm going to work with you for Sun City. Put Maricopa County for goodness sakes, right? And if you know if their price point is such that they may be going to Maricopa, the town, or Casa Grande, put Maricopa and Pinal counties. Then you got it covered, right? So I recommend you put counties there that gives you a broader area to cover. If for some reason they're restricting you to a city, that's a red flag, folks.
Yeah.
Right? So you're talking to them about what they're looking for. This is a great opportunity to take notes on some other sheet of paper about what exactly they want to buy, right? But this is to let them understand that you will be negotiating at their direction to obtain acceptable terms and conditions for the purchase, exchange, or option of the property. I wouldn't read that whole thing. I would just say that you're negotiating the buyer's directions to accept or obtain acceptable terms and conditions for this purchase, right? So what that means, and this is where I get a lot of agents that get stuck. They feel like asking for this commission is wrong. Now, if I told you that when you're doing this, you are also going to explain that part of your job, oh wait, is to negotiate. Didn't that just say negotiate? It's to negotiate all these different terms. If you had a buyer that needed closing costs because they needed down payment assistance, right? And if you wrote an offer for them asking for the down payment assistance and the seller said, no way, not doing it, you would not pull out a checkbook and go, don't worry, buyer, I got you covered. Let me write that check. Would you? No, you wouldn't? You sure? Then why are you willing to do that on your commission? Oh, we can't get the 3% or potatoes. I don't care what it is. We can't get what we asked for in our buyer broker agreement. Don't worry. I'll take care of you. I'll write a check to myself. Like, I'll just tear up my money. It doesn't matter. Why would you do that? Right? If a seller came back and said, I know you asked for 4% in closing costs because you're doing down payment assistance and you need this for a VA buyer or down payment assistance, whatever it is, right? And they came back and said, we're only giving you 3% for your concessions. Well, you knew they needed that other 1%. What are your options in that scenario? What would you talk to your buyer about? What are some of the options? Lloyd, I know you've done this. You can unmute. What would you ask the seller to do? Or one of the options to do? You're off by 1%. He's not going to unmute. You could ask to increase the price. Right? There's other ways to look at that, right? You're off by 1%. Let's increase the price to cover that. Right? So when it has to do with compensation, our agents are freaking out. Why? It's just another thing that's a moving number that you have to juggle as a part of the negotiations. Right? So let's say you have something that says 3 potatoes and they only offer to pay 2 potatoes. You don't have to go back to your buyer and say, don't worry, let me write myself a check, right? Well, you know, these people aren't willing to do that. Do you want to increase the offer by that 1% and see if they'll take that and then pay this? I mean, they're going to know what you're doing. It's not like it's hidden. You counter with the purchase price shall be 1% more. Let's say it's a $500,000 home. We're going to offer $5,000 more, right? But we want the SCA line 10 back at this number. So please understand and stop cutting yourself short. When you are signing this agreement, there should not be, no part of this conversation should be, don't worry, if we don't get it, I'll reduce my commission. Because why are you signing this? Just tear this up. Don't show any homes because you're not doing yourself a favor. You don't deserve to be paid if you can't sign this agreement, right? Seriously, if you can't get your buyer to sign this, then don't work with them, but you got to figure out another approach with your next buyer, right? But part of this is negotiating on the buyer's direction. Acceptable terms. If they've agreed on this to pay you a certain amount, that's part of those acceptable terms, because guess what? They owe the balance to you. And that's part of what you have to explain is they owe that balance if they don't get it. But right now, you need to make sure that negotiate part is very clear. And don't worry, buyer. And you can say it here, or you can say it when we get below. Part of what I do for you is try to negotiate most, if not all of this, that the seller will pay. Negotiate. You don't guarantee it, you're negotiating it, okay? The next line says, assist the buyer during the transaction with your scope of expertise and licensing. What does that mean? Guess what? You're going to help them through the inspection period, working with their lender to get their loan docs processed, right? Not meaning we're lenders, not at all, but you're going to help them get through each of the phases of the purchase contract, right? That's part of your job. Okay. And then the last thing says agency relationship. So let me tell you, it's very funny as a broker when I see the buyer broker agreement come in and no agency agreement come in. How did you possibly get this signed without doing the other document? Because it says you're probably checking the box. It says fourth in the real estate agency and disclosure election form. How did you do that on this if you didn't do the other form? How'd you give that to them? How did you explain that? If anything, I like starting with agency first. Now we'll get to it later and I'll explain why I like to start with it first, because I think it gives the better foundation to explain that you are going to be working with them and fiduciarily that's where your focus is. Look, something is in big, bold letters here. If broker does not accompany buyer on first visit to any property, including model home, new home lot, or open house held by a builder, seller, or other real estate broker, buyer acknowledges that the builder, seller, or seller's broker may refuse to compensate broker, which would eliminate any credit against the agreed upon broker compensation below. Remember that opportunity to negotiate. This negates that opportunity. Now, I'm not saying you have to read those three sentences out loud, but you better give your buyer an opportunity to read those three sentences and say, do you have any questions? I need to make sure you understand this. You can't go anywhere without me first. We can talk about open houses, but absolutely you cannot go to new homes anywhere without me on that first visit. Okay. Because you know, part of what we just discussed is that I'm going to negotiate on your behalf. You remove that opportunity for me to negotiate for you. You eliminate any credit. Very important that the buyer understands that. Because then when a week later you hear that they went over to Richmond American and had a great time and fell in love with this house, you have to break the horrible news that they are going to owe you your compensation because the builder's not going to pay it and they're still under contract with you.
Some of the new builds were 2 or 3 visits last time I did them.
The first 2 or 3 visits?
You had to go 2 or 3 visits before. D.R. Horton was like that, and I think Ashton Woods was like that when I went there.
That's weird. You should just have to sign that first time.
Yeah, I signed their agreement, brought my buyer broker agreement,
Don't bring your buyer broker agreement. They have no right to that. I'm sick of them asking for that. If the title company needs it, that's fine. The builder should not have any right to it. I don't understand this. This is an employment agreement. And am I going to share with you my employment agreement with Realty One Group? Would you ever share your employment agreement with somebody else? It's a private agreement. It's confidential. They have no right to that. Now, they do have the right to say that the buyer cannot use the monies coming from the builder to pay you, but they cannot dictate your buyer broker agreement. So just, I've
Makes
been
sense.
hearing that, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's another bolded line, right? Buyer agrees to review the Arizona Department of Real Estate buyer advisory to assist in buyer inspections and investigations, okay? So how many of you in your welcome emails, thank you for calling me and your interest in working with me, send the link to the buyer advisory and say, please save this link. When we meet together, I'm going to give you the last page of this document to show that I've given you the latest information. That's why I use the link. The link gives you whatever's been updated. And both the Department of Real Estate and AAR that work together collectively on this buyer advisory update the links on there twice a year. We don't get notified when they're updated. They just have people that do update those at least twice a year. They go through and make sure those hyperlinks are correct and going to the right places. So when you talk to somebody about sex offenders or they want to look at the crime stats, guess what? They have a button they can click on that buyer advisory to go to the City of Phoenix sex offender. You go right to it. Right? Crime stats for the City of Phoenix, crime stats for Tempe, crime stats for Scottsdale. You don't have to go to the City of Scottsdale and then figure out where Department of Police. Let's go to police. Well, where do I find the crime stat? They don't have to go play a finding game. We give it all to them on this buyer advisory. Tell them it's there, right? But send that link as a part of that intro email. It should be part of your regular procedures, your operating procedures that you do each and every time. I'm so excited to work with you. This is exciting opportunity for you to find a new home. Let me get you a document that is so filled with resources that gets you directly to what you want, right? Does this make sense? Okay. Once again, we see broker compensation is not set by law. This time we need their initials. So do you think you need to actually read those 2 lines out loud to your client? Yes. You should be absolutely stating, right? Broker compensation is not set by law nor by any board, association of realtors, multiple listing service, or in any manner other than is fully negotiated between broker and buyer in this agreement. So then we go to a retainer fee. Now, this is somewhat interesting. Some of our agents do have retainer fees, oftentimes not for buyers. Oftentimes retainers are used with listings. I have seen a few with buyers, but they're few and far between. If you're considering doing a retainer fee, please come talk to me on a buyer broker agreement, okay? Basically, it's saying that the buyer is going to pay the broker a non-refundable retainer fee in the amount of whatever dollars it is. It has to be dollars because you don't have a percentage of anything yet. You don't have a price yet, right? They're paying that to Realty One Group within 5 days of execution of this agreement, right? And then the fee can be credited or not credited against the broker compensation that's stated below. So the idea is, and I've actually seen this on rentals, right? That they get the tenant to give them, I don't know, several $100s up front and say, we'll credit this. But if I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks with you trying to find a rental where I may get, 2 sticks that are going to rub together to pay me, I'm going to take your money up front and then we will offset that with whatever comes from the landlord. Okay. And this would be the form this is not the form you would use that on, but that would be on the other, the tenant broker agreement. Sorry. Broker compensation. Okay. again, in big bold print, check only one and fill in the compensation, which must be a fixed amount or rate. I am always fascinated that I have more than one line of these three checked and filled in. It says check only one. You cannot check or fill in more than one. If you want to use the other and you want to write X% for new home sales and X% for resale homes, that's fine. Okay. But don't put some percentage on line 34 and then put other below. Just check other and write it below. Does that make sense? So it says check only one. Please don't check more than one because we're going to send this back to you and say it's wrong. Okay. So if the buyer closes escrow on a transaction, buyer agrees to compensate broker as follows. So this is the place where you say, remember above where I said, part of what I'm going to do is negotiate on your behalf. I'm going to go negotiate for most, if not all of this to be paid by the seller. That's the conversation, right? Now, understand, if we get a screaming deal on a property, they may not be willing to pay me all of this. And so as we write that offer, I'll have that conversation with you again because you will be responsible for the balance of this. You notice I did not say, if we don't get it, I'm gonna write myself a check. Don't worry about it, right? You will be responsible for the balance. So, and most of the time I've seen that happen. Yeah, that $800,000 home that got a $700,000 deal through. Guess who they didn't pay? The agent. But you know what? If you're writing a $700,000 deal on an $800,000 home, you better be having a conversation with your buyer saying, you know, we're going to put the SCA through, but I'm going to bet they're not going to accept that. And you need to remember that you're still responsible for that X percentage. Okay. That needs to be a part of writing that offer. I think that is the biggest area where we are seeing that agents are not negotiating their compensation, is when the buyer is insistent on making lowball offers, right? Why would the seller bother? Why would they bother paying the agent? Fine, you want me to take this amount, I'm going to take this amount, but I'm not going to pay for any of this crap. Not paying your closing costs, not paying your agent, not paying any of this. And by the way, you get to the inspection period, guess what else they're not going to pay for? Any repairs, right? That is the bottom line. I'll take it, but I'm not doing any of the rest of this. So you're writing that offer. That conversation needs to be a part of that offer. You are responsible for the buyer broker compensation, right? And by the way, adding it on top of the 700,000 afterwards probably isn't going to happen, right? Because they're like, no, you friggin' take care of your own agent, right? And that's when the other agent said, you delivered the offer. That's your problem. It's our obligation, right? But the buyer needs to understand then that they're liable for those funds, and don't cut them any slack. If that's what they're going to do, they need to understand their responsibility in that manner. Okay. One line, not any of the rest of these. So, all right. It is important to understand. And by the way, this VA, they changed all that. So it was modified by VA regulation. So the buyer in a VA transaction can pay the buyer broker. Okay. So this section is talking about that you can get compensation from the seller. They really need to get rid of the seller's broker because that's not happening anymore. It's just from the seller, but that's fine. And this ties to that SCA, where the SCA says you can get compensation from the seller or the seller's broker and from the buyer. You can get it from multiple parties, okay? If seller or seller's broker's offer of compensation is greater than the broker compensation, broker shall be paid the broker compensation and balance is credited to buyer. So let's just say yours is 2.5% and your SCA says 3%. and they agree to the 3%. You do not all of a sudden get 3%. You only get 2.5%. That other 0.5% goes to the buyer. And you need to explain this in this scenario because it's going to come back up again later. If you're doing something less than say 3%, which I would say would be, ranges between, 2 and 4%. But, when you're doing that, when you write that offer and what you write on your SCA, if it's going to be more than what is on the buyer broker agreement, you need to revisit this in your conversation with your client. Okay. If the seller broker's compensation is less than the broker compensation, buyer may request seller to pay the broker compensation as part of an offer to purchase the property. Any broker compensation not paid by seller or seller's broker shall be paid by buyer. Dun dun dun. Is that by a check from yourself?
Nope.
I'm going to make you guys remember this. Trust me. I love having people say that to me. I'm like, you would never do that if it were the concessions. Okay. Failure to complete to your buyer. You need them to understand that they are agreeing to act in good faith to acquire the property. If for some reason, if completion of a transaction is prevented by buyer's breach or with the consent of buyer other than provided in the purchase contract, the broker compensation is due and payable by the buyer. Do you think maybe you need to say, look, I'm going to help you process through this and explain the contract. But if for some reason you do something outside of that contract, you could be liable and and here's where I would say you owe the brokerage that, because technically we own the agreement, right, as the brokerage. The check is written to Realty One Group. It's not written to you. Okay. So you could explain it that way, but it is due and payable by the buyer. All right. Compensation after expiration date. Okay. Let's say this agreement expires on October 31st and you are under a contract during the term of agreement. So you've gone in a contract in October. It expires at the end of October, but you don't close till November. Okay. Buyer closes that was executed during the terms of the agreement, or buyer closes property for which the escrow was open during the terms of agreement. The buyer still agrees to pay the broker compensation. I mean, or within calendar days after the expiration date. So you can do either, but they have to enter into a property with you at that point, negotiated by the broker. Okay. So just a little caveat there. Broker shall show property listings that fit buyer's criteria regardless of compensation. So this is kind of a change from before, right? Because we had compensation offered before and it's not anymore. I'm wondering if we have a newer version of this. That's weird. But broker by seller or seller's broker unless instructed otherwise by buyer in writing. So at one point we were calling the other agent asking what was the seller offering. We cannot do that anymore because the ER no longer has an amount in there. Okay. They can offer it if the seller's agent has somehow negotiated it and added it in their ER. They may in fact call you and say, hey, just want you to know they're paying this amount. I see it on very rare occasions, but it is there. Personally, I would just make sure to go after and negotiate for your buyer for what the buyer's looking for. Okay. This was allowing us the opportunity not to show homes that the seller said they're not paying any compensation. We're not at that point right now. It may very well come to that when we shift to a seller's market and things start flying again. We could be seeing that sellers are offering zero. They don't need to. They're just going to put a sign in their yard and come buy my home, and you buyers pay your own buyer broker. And that very well could happen as the market shifts. We are not there and we're not anywhere close to there at this point. Okay. This was instructing us that they had to tell us in writing if they did not want to see any properties that the seller was not providing compensation. Equal housing. We also always have to have equal housing on these documents in terms of buyer broker. I would definitely talk to the buyer about equal housing and that there cannot be any discrimination about federal fair housing laws. So you can go over that. Other potential buyers. Buyer understands that there could be other buyers represented by Realty One Group, right? We've got 3,000 agents, over 3,000 in the Maricopa County area. It is very possible you might write an offer and you might write an offer on the same property, right? We don't know. The seller may know, but we won't know about that, right? But they have to understand that it's possible that the brokerage could have multiple people writing offers. In fact, I have seen it and have where the same agent is having to write offers. That is not fun, but release a broker. Okay, you have a section here that is all in bold. Buyer expressly releases, holds harmless, and indemnifies broker from any and all liability responsibility regarding buyer's selection and use of third-party professionals to perform related services, or buyer's election not to use the services of such third-party professionals, i.e., you do not do home inspections, right? I hope you have a list of multiple home inspectors and multiple lenders and multiple pest companies, right? And let the buyer select. I love having partnerships with people, but I highly recommend you have more than one choice, because I can assure you if something goes wrong in that inspection, and that was the only inspector you gave them, guess who they're coming after? Not just the inspector, but you. Okay, it was your recommendation. We have this in here, but I don't know how much it's going to hold up if they make a huge error and it's the only one on your list you're handing out. Please, please provide more than one recommendation. Okay. You can write additional terms in here. Off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of any that might apply. You will notice that we do talk about alternative dispute resolution. If the buyer and broker agree to mediate any dispute, remember, this is just between you, and remember, you're the broker in this case, you and the buyer about compensation. If you go to mediation, both parties walk in with a check. Usually it's about $500 or $1,000. So you got to be careful what you're going over here. So parties shall agree to an arbitrator. That's where you start. Realty One Group does not get into commission or arbitration or any of that. That is up to you to pursue. We will release the file to you to hire an attorney if you need to, or go through this process without the attorney in the arbitration. Disputes and claims shall be done on an individual capacity and not as a plaintiff or class member in a class action lawsuit. They waive their right to commence or become a party to or remain a participant in a group representative, class collective or hybrid class collective action. Gee, funny, why are we not allowing class action lawsuits, right, with a huge group? Because that's what we just went through. So buyer initials there. Attorney fees, if you do end up going with an attorney, whoever ends up winning typically gets their attorney fees covered. The prevailing party shall be awarded. Probably when you're getting to this part, I would explain that ADR stands for mediation and arbitration, that we don't initially go to court. But if you do end up having to go to court or over the fees, then these other things apply. Understand that it is all governed by the state of Arizona laws. Copies and counterparts. I mean, hopefully you're in the same place as your client. If you're not, you're probably doing this electronically, but you could sign two separate agreements, right? Your client could sign one, you could sign another, and they're merged together. That's what counterpart means. Lastly, this is this entire agreement plus any addenda and attachments. What addenda would be attached to this? What did I talk about?
Agency disclosure.
Agency disclosure should be attached to this. Just as an aside, what other documents are attached when you are doing your very first 5 documents that you need to put in your pre-contract file? We've got the buyer broker agreement. We've got the agency. What are the other 3 documents?
Affiliated business
Our
disclosure.
ABA, affiliated business arrangements, ABA for Realty One Group, correct? That's number 3. Number 4, We already talked about it. It's actually noted on this document. What's the thing?
Advisory.
The buyer advisory. Thank you. Yes, buyer advisory. And what is the fifth they just snuck in when they did the 5 for the pre-contract? What is the big thing we have to start telling our buyers immediately? Dealing with money. Money, money, money. Wire fraud. Those are your 5 documents for your pre-contract. You should have them in a packet. They should be separate in your folder that you can go do those 5 documents long before you get ready to write an offer. This is what you're meeting with your buyer and going over these things, right? Then funny thing here, buyer warrants that the buyer has the legal capacity, full power, and authority to enter into this agreement and consummate the transaction on their own behalf. Now, oftentimes it's the seller that we run into a capacity issue with, not the buyer. But if for some reason something is bugging you that they may not have the capacity, you need to watch that, okay? We are hearing about that on occasion. So here you go, acceptance. And funny thing, it actually has the buyer's address, phone number, and email. Please collect that data. If this is somebody new to you, get all that information so you have it. Where are we on our timing? Oh my God, I've gone over 1 document. Okay, you'll notice on the very bottom, buyer broker use. Anytime you see that, most likely within 72 hours of that document being signed, it needs to be into our system. Now, we only come after you on a few cases, but this is one of them. Within 72 hours of this document and those related 4 other documents, they need to be uploaded into SkySlope in the pre-contract thing. I'm going to go very quickly over the buyer-tenant employment agreement so I can hopefully get to the SCA. This is the agreement addendum to change either the buyer agreement to show property, the buyer-broker exclusive employment agreement, or the tenant-broker exclusive employment agreement. So this addendum to the above agreement that was dated on what date? We need to know what that other date was dated, right? You signed up with your buyer on January 1st of 2025 and it expires on October 31st. You're under contract now and you do decide that you're going to change your compensation. This is how you change it. This is where you go that says the buyer broker agreement is changing from, green to blue, 3 to 2, 3 to 2.5, 5 to, 4. I don't know what it is, right? Term expiration, a new expiration date. It's expiring on October 31st and you're going to bump it to November 31st. This is the form you do that on. Any additional terms and conditions? Here is the cancellation. Your buyer has lost their job and they need to stop looking for a home. You need to cancel the contract. Now, I guess you could keep it there if you wanted, but they probably can't buy anything till they get a job. So this is where you go to cancel this. Now, if you have been working with this buyer for 9 months, you've driven all over the state, you could ask for cancellation. Look, you owe me $500 for all the miles, blah, blah, blah. That is totally your choice, whatever you want to put in there. Oftentimes we get more of these agreements with dollars in them, again, on our listing side, not the buyer side. But again, if you're going to cancel a buyer broker agreement, that top one, it's a mutual agreement. It's not a one-sided cancellation. So you got to get this document signed. Everybody signs it. And sure enough, look at that. Buyer broker use only. You got to load that document into our system. We need to see that. Seller compensation addendum. Set those expectations with your buyer. They should have been set when you did the buyer broker agreement, right? So when you're getting ready to do the seller compensation as a part of your offer, you need to include this if you want to get paid. If you told your buyer, look, I'm going to negotiate most, if not all, of this compensation from the seller, and you don't include this, you just blew it. How are you going to explain that? Because the seller's not going to pay you a dime, okay? So these additional terms and conditions are part of the contract, okay? This is when you're putting your contract together with your buyer and you're going over, remember, we have our choice. Do you want to ask the seller to pay all of this? Do you want to be strategic? There are multiple offers. Why not you pay my compensation and then let them have that reduction, but they still get the purchase price they want, right? And they get to save more of that money. So you have different ways you can do this, but you've got to talk to your client about it. Okay. So check any that apply and fill in the compensation. So is it a sale, percentage, or a flat amount, right? This is what you're asking the seller to cover. The amount paid pursuant to line 10 is in addition to any seller concessions credited to the buyer in the contract. You may be asking for 2, 3, 4% in seller concessions, trying to get interest rate buy down, trying to get those closing costs. This is separate, right? This is in addition to. This is why I always get frustrated with when people counter the SCA and in the back, they don't reference the SCA. These other line items are so critical. You need to make sure that the SCA does not get dropped off, right? I've had people say my seller's not going to sign the SCA because we're countering it. That is not true, folks. They've got to sign the SCA. These other lines are critical, right? This addendum provides the undersigned's written consent that the buyer broker to receive compensation from more than one party. Who could be those parties, folks? It could be the seller and it could be the buyer. If you don't sign this, can you get paid from the seller and the buyer? I don't know. This is giving that express right from both sides, okay? They intended the brokers to be paid as third-party beneficiaries. This is so critical, folks. The only time in the purchase contract you can use this as a part of commissions is with this SCA. I saw an addendum come across my desk yesterday. Well, I see it probably every week, where the buyer and seller are saying that the agents are providing concessions. They're giving gifts to people. Well, I have no problem with that. But who's a party to the purchase contract? Who are the parties to the purchase contract? Who is the purchase contract between?
There's
Buyer and seller. Anywhere does it say a broker is a part of that purchase contract? No. Does the broker sign the purchase contract?
Yeah.
At the very bottom. We just initial that we've received it. We're not a party to that contract, okay? So if you are giving some type of concession to your buyer, how do you give a concession to your buyer?
In writing.
How do you give it to your buyer? How do you make sure title knows you're giving a gift? What is it on? Nope. You're not a part of the purchase contract. You can't use an addendum. That's between a buyer and a seller. You can amend this buyer broker if you want to.
Buyer broker.
You could do the buyer tenant thing, but really, if you're giving a gift to your client, where is there a line on a document that you fill out every single time? There is a line on a document. If you want to be paid, what document?
Disbursement.
Your CDI. Your CDI on the bottom says customer or client gift. I think it says customer.
Would you want to get that before it gets percent out of underwriting? Because underwriting will kick that back if it's not.
So the comment here from title is that yes, you need to get that to title. So I would say you are welcome to do an email to your client and say, I will gift you $500 to cover whatever the widget is that needs to be covered. But do not, under any circumstances, put that in an addendum. You are giving the buyer and seller the right to change your addendums because they're the ones signing it. Did you even agree to that? I don't know. I have no idea. Your signature isn't on there. The other agent's signature is on there because you're not a party to that contract, right? So They're intending the brokers to be third-party beneficiaries of the contract, right? That's why it says third-party beneficiaries. The SCA, yes, is attached to the contract. You guys are a part of that. You're allowing that to be put forward, that the buyer and seller. But guess what? The SCA doesn't say what your agreement that you're getting paid. That's on your buyer broker agreement, which you signed, right? This is your buyer asking the seller to pick up their tab. Okay? That's why you don't sign this, because the buyer's responsible for whatever we don't get the seller to agree to that the buyer's asking for. That's what the SCA is for. And here you'll see you've got all those things. And look, guess what? We've got to get that document in our files, right? We need to make sure we're seeing that. So real estate agency and disclosure. This honestly is what I would start the conversation with. This is not an employment agreement, but this is talking about how you relate as the broker, as the agent for the brokerage, that you are going to be working with this buyer. And this is just talking about before the buyer or tenant or seller or landlord enters into discussion with a real estate broker or licensee affiliated with a broker, the seller and buyer should understand what type of agency relationship or representation they will have with the broker in the transaction. This should be the first document you talk to your buyer about, right? Hey, buyer, you want to work with me? Let's talk about what that means. You want me to exclusively represent you? I will have the fiduciary duties, of loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, and accounting in dealings with you as the buyer. This is what we're signing up for. You're signing up for, and I'm agreeing to, right? Now, other potential buyers may be represented by our broker, may make offers with us the same property that we're looking at. You need to understand that. And we'll get to this below this, but if you're working with a buyer broker, it's really the top one. I'm going to skip the sellers, right? But here's the thing, buyer, understand that if we go to a property that is listed by a Realty One Group agent, we could end up in something called limited representation. And in those instances, right, I will become limited. That's why it says limited representation on what I can provide you in those discussions. Now, I always like, after this and we start looking at properties, hopefully the first property we're going to is not a Realty One Group property. I want to talk about market conditions. I want to talk about what sellers are giving buyers. Looking in a general area, homes that have sold in this area, buyers have been receiving concessions of 1%, 2%, 3%, right? We're seeing people are offers are coming in oftentimes 10,000 below list price for those homes that have been on the market more than this many days, right? I can have that conversation right now. Guess what? As soon as we walk into a Realty One Group listing, I can't talk about price. I can't compare that to another property. I cannot say, wow, this place is a piece of junk. It's not worth any of this, because I cannot harm a Realty One Group seller. Okay. So have those conversations, and have as a part of this saying, we'll talk about many things that you can ask for before we even go look at properties. And then if in fact we end up in a scenario where it's limited representation, it will be your responsibility, buyer, to instruct how you want me to write your offer. And that includes if you want to ask for concessions or not, because I cannot ask you at that point. All I can say is, what do you want to offer? Okay, thank you. And if you ask me what my opinion is, please understand I cannot tell you, right? But if you have this conversation on day one, they understand that when you're going out with them. Now, thankfully, I don't know about you, we got a lot of agents, we got a lot of listings, but they're not all in one consolidated area. Most areas have listings by HomeSmart, Russ Lyon, Realty One Group, My Home Group, you know, you name them all, they all have listings, right? So, you know, oftentimes you're showing lots and lots of different listings in an area. So you have plenty of opportunity to talk about these things. But if you start with this, then you get to the buyer broker agreement. They understand what your value is. You're going to help them through this process. That's why you're asking for the amount that you're asking for. And by the way, I would not preset what your compensation is on your buyer broker agreement. Doesn't mean you can't have, this is what I do in this price point, this is my compensation. In this neighborhood or in this type of scenario, this is my compensation. And if the buyer wants to try to negotiate it down from there and you don't want to go down from there, then pick up your stuff and walk out. Right? And part of that argument, folks, if you can't negotiate with the buyer, and I would use this to the buyer, if I can't negotiate for my own compensation, what am I going to negotiate for you? You want me to be able to negotiate. This is why I'm worth this, is because I'm going to do this on the other side with the seller, right? On your behalf. If all you do is go, okay, I'll do that. Are you really representing that buyer? Are they going to feel confident you're going to represent the buyer? They may have gotten a great deal, but guess who's not going to do much when they go up against another seller? You. So stand up for what you're worth. Know what you're worth going into that conversation though, folks, okay? So I really went through the last part of this pretty quickly. This is a disclosure of what does not have to be explained to a buyer. They're not obligated to disclose a property has been the site of a natural death, suicide, homicide, or any crime classified as a felony owned or operated by a person exposed to HIV or diagnosed as having HIV AIDS or any other disease not known to be transmitted through common occupancy of real estate, or 3, located in the vicinity of a sex offender. Seller and seller's representatives may not treat the existing terms or conditions of offers as confidential unless there's a confidentiality agreement between the parties. Now, I would not necessarily read all of that to them, but I would say, please take a moment and read this paragraph. There are some things that buyers do not understand, that brokers are not obligated to disclose that. Neither myself as a broker, nor the other side, the seller's not obligated to do that either. So you need to understand that this is on this form. It is elsewhere as well, but it is a good place to go ahead and state that. And then here is a big, bold thing. This is one that I would read out loud. Look, I just want to make sure you understand that the duties of a broker in a real estate transaction do not relieve the seller or the buyer from responsibility to protect their own interests. The seller and buyer should carefully read all agreements to ensure the documents adequately express their understanding of the transaction. Have you had a chance to read through this document, and are you comfortable with it? Do you have any questions, right? That was not up there, but that's then the question to your client. Do you understand this document, right? Again, this is saying that compensation is not establishing agency election does not establish broker compensation. I am simply representing you on this scenario. In order to get paid, we're going to go into that next document, which is our buyer broker agreement, right? This comes first and goes into that buyer broker agreement. And that way, when you get to the line that says you've already done this, how about that? You've already done it. Okay. So what boxes should be checked when you work with a buyer? What line numbers?
Number 1 or 48.
So you don't want to show any Realty One Group properties? Then what lines should be checked? What lines?
48 and 50.
Thank you. Hi, Coey. All right. Yes, 48 and 50, both of those need to be checked if you want to show Realty One Group properties as well as any others, but you must start with representing the buyer as the buyer broker, and then the bottom would say the undersigned buyer. Now, I'm going to throw a trick here, and I did not do these in the document here. If you have an unrepresented buyer, totally off kilter here, if you're the listing agent, have an unrepresented buyer, you would check box 49. on this upper section, buyer or tenant election, it would be 49 and 60 would say buyer. That means you represent the seller and not the buyer. That's the only box that's checked, 49 and then 60 for buyer, okay? I'll just show you the seller side of this. Again, if you're a listing agent and you're doing this, you want 56 and 57, and then on line 60, you check seller. Signatures, and that's all, folks. So I just want to make sure that you guys, anybody have any questions? We got right. Did I really do that? 11:03. How about that? I wrapped that up, did so much on the first document, and that's why I started with that actually. But questions? Where are you guys? How many people do I have out there? Any questions from folks online? I'm going to stop my.
I do have a question, and
Yep.
it is a question about the sky slope and where we are supposed to put the buyer broker agreement, because I thought if it was in sky slope, you had it, and I learned differently. So where am I supposed to put that?
So there's SkySlope forms, which is not SkySlope. I like to call SkySlope our big file cabinet, okay? SkySlope forms are documents. The documents do not automatically go into the file cabinet. You have to go into the regular SkySlope, not SkySlope forms, and create a buyer pre-contract file.
Pre-contract.
There is a video on my YouTube channel that is office procedures. It will show you exactly where to set that up.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Kat did a whole video. It's a normal buyer file.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, people get stuck because they think that they don't see pre-contract. Just go in as if you're starting a file, and once you click far enough in, it will give you a pre-contract option. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes. What do you got?
On the